What if I told you that the disease the ancient Sumerians believed the gods planted inside humanity wasn't a metaphor at all? What if it was actually a description of something we're only now beginning to understand through genetics and evolutionary biology? But here's the twist. The Sumerians weren't talking about a curse or a punishment. They were documenting something far stranger, a collaboration, an ancient agreement between humans and something else that changed the course of our entire species. The standard interpretation of the Sumerian texts goes something like this. The gods created humanity as workers, gave us intelligence, and then planted a disease, sometimes translated as darkness, sometimes as weakness, sometimes as a fundamental flaw, that would keep us dependent, suffering, and manageable. It's a creation myth about control. It's about masters and servants. But what if that's not what the Sumerians were actually saying at all? Consider this. The Sumerians were one of the first civilizations to develop complex written language, advanced mathematics, city planning, irrigation systems, and formal governance. They weren't primitive, they weren't confused, they had observed something real in human biology, something that defined our entire existence as a species, and they were trying to explain it using the only framework they had, mythology. In their world, the gods was how they described forces they couldn't name directly, forces that came from outside humanity, forces that fundamentally altered us. Here's what modern science has discovered. Approximately 8% of the human genome isn't human at all. It's viral DNA, ancient retroviruses that invaded our ancestors' cells millions of years ago and never left. They integrated directly into our genetic code. They're passed down to every single human being that's ever been born. And unlike viruses that kill their hosts, these ancient viral insertions became permanent parts of who we are. Some of them were even repurposed by our bodies for critical functions. The Sumerians couldn't have known the specific mechanism. They didn't have electron microscopes or DNA sequencing technology. But they lived in a time when they were developing the intellectual tools to observe human illness, human behavior, and human nature in unprecedented detail. And one observation kept recurring. Something fundamental to being human seemed to come from outside of us. Something that made us different from other animals. Something that made us capable of civilization, but also vulnerable in ways we couldn't explain. Now, the narrative usually stops here and turns the story into one about exploitation and control. But what if the Sumerians were trying to describe a trade-off? What if when they said the gods planted something inside us, they meant that something essential to human consciousness, creativity, and complexity actually came from that viral integration? That our capacity for abstract thought, our susceptibility to disease, our ability to create civilization, and our capacity for suffering were all somehow connected to these ancient genetic invaders? Think about this. The same viral genes that create vulnerability in our immune system also seem to play a role in brain development and neural complexity. The genetic sequences that make us susceptible to certain diseases are intricately connected to the systems that allow us to develop language, create art, build societies, and contemplate our own existence. We didn't get consciousness despite the viral DNA in our genome. We might have gotten consciousness because of it. The Sumerians developed written language, and in doing so, they became obsessed with understanding themselves. They created the first medical texts. They observed patterns in human illness and behavior. And when they tried to explain why humans were both capable of extraordinary things and burdened by suffering and disease, they landed on a story that's actually much closer to the truth than we've given them credit for. They didn't say we were cursed. They said something was planted inside us, and that the gods, that outside force, was responsible. What makes this interpretation revolutionary is that it removes the blame. The Sumerians weren't saying humans were inherently flawed because we were inferior to the gods or because we were created as slaves. They were saying that human nature itself is the result of a mixing, a blending, an ancient collaboration between what was purely human and what came from outside. And that collaboration created both our greatest strengths and our deepest vulnerabilities. Modern genetics has actually validated part of this ancient observation in ways the Sumerians could never have imagined. We've discovered that some of these ancient viral insertions aren't just neutral passengers in our genome. Some of them actively regulate our immune response. Some control how our brain develops. Some influence our emotional capacity. They're not entirely parasitic. They're integrated so deeply that removing them would fundamentally change what it means to be human. We'd be different creatures entirely, probably less conscious, probably less capable, but also probably less vulnerable to certain diseases and conditions. The question the Sumerians were really asking, whether they knew it or not, was this: if something outside of us fundamentally shaped our biology and consciousness, what does that mean for our understanding of human nature? Are we flawed because of that outside influence, or are we magnificent because of it? And that question remains completely unresolved in modern science. There's a deeper resource that goes into the specific genetic mechanisms and the actual Sumerian texts with full translations that I've linked in the description and the pinned comment. It's worth checking out if you want to understand the biology side of this more thoroughly, because the connections are even stranger than what we've covered here. Here's where this gets even more interesting. The Sumerian texts use specific language when they describe when this planted disease activates. They talk about it activating during times of consciousness growth, times of expanded awareness, times when humans become capable of asking difficult questions about their own nature. And modern epigenetics, the study of how genes turn on and off, has discovered that certain dormant viral sequences in our genome do in fact activate during periods of neurological development, trauma, or significant intellectual challenge. It's almost as if the Sumerians were describing a biological phenomenon where the more evolved we become, the more we interact with these ancient viral sequences. The more conscious we become, the more we're activated by the very thing that gave us consciousness in the first place. We're trapped in a loop where our greatest strength and our greatest vulnerability come from the same source. The Sumerians were astronomers. They were mathematicians. They were observers of patterns. And they were telling us something that took modern science thousands of years to begin to understand: that human nature isn't something we inherited cleanly from a divine source. It's a hybrid. It's a mixture. It's the product of an ancient merger between different forms of biological existence. And that merger didn't happen because the gods wanted to enslave us. It happened because that merger created something extraordinary. What they called a planted disease, we might call an ancient collaboration. What they interpreted as a curse, we might now understand as the source of our unique consciousness. And what they were trying to warn us about, that this thing inside us would activate and create vulnerability, might actually be the price of the greatest gift any species could receive: the capacity to understand ourselves. So when you feel vulnerable, when you feel like there's something inside you that doesn't quite fit, when you feel the weight of being human with all its complexity and pain and beauty, remember that you're not experiencing a curse. You're experiencing the legacy of an ancient partnership that made you capable of things no other species on Earth can do. You can read these words. You can contemplate infinity. You can create meaning out of chaos. And that capacity came from something that lives inside your very cells, something that the Sumerians recognized as fundamental to our nature thousands of years ago. The real question isn't whether the disease was planted inside us. The real question is, what do we do now that we know what we are? Now that we understand that our consciousness, our creativity, and our suffering all share a common origin, do we try to remove it? Do we accept it? Or do we learn to work with it, the way the Sumerians were trying to tell us thousands of years ago? If you want to dive deeper into this topic and explore the actual Sumerian texts alongside the genetic evidence, I've put together a comprehensive resource that you'll find in the pinned comment and in the channel description. It connects everything we've discussed today with sources you can verify yourself. That's exactly the kind of deep dive content that helps us all think more critically about what we believe and why. Thank you so much for joining me on this exploration of what the Sumerians actually knew about human nature, and what modern science is only beginning to understand. If this video sparked something in you, that sense of curiosity and wonder, please hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss when we upload new episodes. Because here at Uncharted Minds, we're always asking the questions that textbooks skip over, and we'd love to have you along for the journey. See you in the next one.